My name is Miles Harrington, and the last time I saw my wife, Alina, she stood beside my brother Jasper at my grandfather's while reading and called me useless. I can still hear her voice, low, polished, cruel in its precision. Useless, she said like it was my first name, not an insult. The lawyer's hand hadn't even left the envelope when she said it. Jasper stood tall beside her, perfectly tailored, his face smug with anticipation. And I? I stood in the back of the room, near the double doors that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and dust, with the sun filtering through stained glass windows that had no business shining on a day like that. The room itself felt heavy with judgment. My parents, Wyatt and Marjorie, sat on the left side of the long oak conference table like royalty holding court. My mother wore navy, always navy when she wanted to look commanding. My father had his arms crossed like a man already bored by whatever disappointment I was about to bring. Neither looked at me, not even a nod of acknowledgement. But they looked at Jasper. Everyone always looked at Jasper. The moment the lawyer, Mr. Lennox, cleared his throat, I braced for it. To Jasper Harrington, he announced, sliding the check across the table, a gift of $10 million, as outlined in the original estate trust. Gasps from the far end of the room. Some distant cousin, I think. But my eyes were on Alina. She smiled like the game was over, like the win had always been his. I looked at my father, and he didn't disappoint. His voice was dry, casual, as if this was all a formality he'd long rehearsed. Go earn your own, he said, without blinking. Just like that. Like a dismissal. Like I was a contractor whose contract had expired. Alina didn't look at me. Not once. But her arm brushed Jasper's. A subtle, possessive gesture. The kind of touch that didn't belong between a man's wife and his brother. That was when the last bit of warmth drained from the room. Whatever I'd hoped this meeting might bring, a scrap of acknowledgement, maybe evaporated. I didn't speak. Didn't rise to argue or ask why. I stood still, because what do you do when the people who claim to love you have already made their choice? And then something strange happened. From the far corner of the room, a man in a gray suit, one I hadn't noticed before, rose to his feet. Not Lennox's assistant, not one of the family's usual circle of vultures. His voice was calm, almost amused. There's one more document, he said. The atmosphere shifted like a low-pressure front had moved through the room. Every glance turned toward him. Alina's smile faltered. Jasper's jaw clenched. My father straightened. My mother's hand moved to her pearls, a reflex she had when something didn't go according to plan. Mr. Lennox paused, surprised. Yes, he said, voice slow now uncertain. There is. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn envelope. Not the crisp, legal kind. No, this was aged, folded, creased like it had lived in someone's pocket for a long, long time. It was addressed, in familiar handwriting, to me. To Miles. Just my name. No flair. No titles. But it hit like a hammer. Alina scoffed, breaking the silence. Seriously? She said, half laughing. This is what we're doing now? Jasper leaned back in his chair, muttering, this better be quick. But I knew it wouldn't be, because I recognized that envelope. I'd seen it before, in Grandpa's back pocket, the last time I visited him alone. A day Jasper claimed he'd also been there. But he wasn't. It was just the two of us, Grandpa and me, on the porch, talking about broken promises and second chances. And now, that same letter was in Mr. Lennox's hands. I stepped forward. The rest of the room was still. Even the lawyer's fingers trembled as he unfolded the letter. Whatever was written there had already disrupted their narrative. The neat little version of history where Miles failed and Jasper triumphed. Where the legacy passed only to the one who looked the part. But legacies, I'd learned, weren't always about appearances. The paper crackled slightly as it opened. Lennox read the first few lines silently, then looked up at me with a strange softness in his eyes. He glanced around the room, then nodded. This document is to be read aloud, per Mr. Harrington's explicit instructions. I felt Alina's gaze finally land on me. She looked afraid. Jasper looked ready to pounce. My father seemed suddenly unsure, like the ground had tilted beneath him. I didn't move. I waited. Lennox began to read. And in that moment, I wasn't the useless man in the room anymore. I was the one they didn't see coming. The envelope was soft with wear, its edges frayed like something handled too many times by trembling fingers. My name, just my name, was written in my grandfather's familiar script, sharp and deliberate, the way he always signed notes he left me in the vineyard workshop. I remembered that handwriting. It had once appeared on a birthday card folded beside a hammer and nails. Build something, Miles. Something they can't tear down. Alina rolled her eyes as if the moment were beneath her. Seriously? She muttered under her breath. Her voice curled with condescension. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Not yet. Jasper leaned forward and groaned like someone being asked to sit through a commercial. This better be quick, he said. His tone was impatient, but his eyes were darting not at me, but at the letter. Lennox unfolded the page, carefully smoothing the creases as though touching something sacred. I could feel the air shift again. The smug confidence that had anchored the room just minutes ago was cracking at the edges. Something unspoken rippled beneath the surface, fear, maybe. Anticipation. Lennox cleared his throat. To Miles Harrington, he began, voice steady. If you're hearing this, it means I've finally gotten the last word in. The room went quiet. Your brother and your parents will no doubt be rolling their eyes. And Alina, if she's still pretending, will likely be fuming. I heard the quick exhale from Alina's direction. Jasper's chair creaked as he crossed his arms. The letter was alive now, pressing against the false reality they had all carefully constructed. I've left you no money in the formal trust, the letter continued. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I knew they'd fight for it, circle it like wolves, and tear each other to pieces. I needed a different route for you. A quieter one they couldn't track. The lawyer reached into his case again and pulled out something flat, folded in a smaller envelope. A second item. This one marked with a symbol I hadn't seen in years. 3 clustered grapes inked in faded blue. The vineyard. This, Lennox said, was left in the same safety deposit box. Your grandfather called it the correction. He handed it to me directly. Cold paper. Smooth. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, with landmarks only someone who had walked those fields would understand. The brook behind the fermentation barn. The slope hill we used for testing drainage during harvest season. A circle marked with red ink near the cellar door. And next to it, in pencil, show him where it started. My throat tightened. I remembered those words. Grandpa used them often when we worked side by side under the sweltering summer heat, pruning vines and testing samples from rows B through H. Everything worth building, he'd say, you build where it started. Alina let out a short, scoffing laugh. What is that? A treasure map? She was trying to mock it, but I could hear the edge in her voice. She was nervous. Jasper was suddenly too quiet. Lennox glanced around the table, then continued reading from the letter. Miles, what they don't know, what they never cared to ask, is that I kept more than wine at the vineyard. I kept records. I kept proof. I kept your name close to the things that mattered, even when they tried to erase you from the family line. He paused, then read aloud. Return to Ashwood. To the estate. To the place where I taught you how to dig with your hands and measure with your heart. What I've left for you can't be handed out in a boardroom. The letter ended there. Silence hung heavy in the air. My father still hadn't looked at me. My mother blinked rapidly, her lips tight. Jasper tilted his head, as if trying to decipher whether this was a bluff or some long con he hadn't anticipated. But I knew. I could feel it. Something deeper than a will. Something more personal than money. I wasn't being handed a gift. I was being handed a chance to rewrite everything. I haven't been to Ashwood in over a year, I said softly, still staring at the map. Not since? You mean when you vanished? Jasper snapped. When you stopped coming to family dinners, stopped answering calls. You ran off, Miles. No, I said. I came back once. In March. I rang the bell at the vineyard. Jasper's brow furrowed, but he recovered quickly. Grandma must not have been home. I looked up slowly. That's what you told me. Something flickered in his eyes. A hesitation. A shadow of recognition. I looked at Lennox. My grandfather. He knew what they were doing, didn't he? Lennox didn't answer. But he didn't have to. Alina stood abruptly, chair scraping the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous. A letter and a drawing? That's what he left you. She walked toward the door, heels clacking against the tile. But I wasn't watching her anymore. I was staring at the map, and something old and buried inside me began to stir, a hunger I'd nearly let die. The vineyard had been my sanctuary, long before the marriage, long before my brother's shadow consumed the family name. It was where Grandpa taught me that growth didn't come in applause, it came in silence, in soil, in slow, deliberate work. And now, that vineyard was calling me back. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was a reckoning. The tires crunched against the gravel like a whisper of welcome and warning. I rolled the windows down halfway as I turned onto the long drive toward the vineyard, letting the October air cut through the stillness inside my chest. The trees lining the road had begun their slow burn into amber and crimson, casting flickers of gold across the windshield. Even the land had started to remember who we were. I parked beneath the same chestnut tree where Grandpa used to sit with his thermos and notebook. For a moment, I didn't move, just sat there, watching the front door like it might open itself. The house had that familiar old weight to it. 2 stories of creaking wood and white paint chipping at the corners, shutters faded from sun and time. The vineyard stretched out behind it, silent but alive. It was the kind of silence that held memory, not absence. I stepped out of the car, the chill catching the collar of my coat. I stood there, just breathing, until I heard the door open. Look who finally remembered the way home. Grandma Evie stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Her voice cut cleaner than pruning shears, but it wasn't rage. Not yet. Just disappointment, aged to perfection. I took a slow step forward. "Hi, Grandma." She didn't move. "You've got nerve coming back here." My feet faltered. "I heard what happened," she said. "Or at least, the version they told me. That you'd moved on. That you didn't care anymore. That you'd gone to find yourself someplace else." I swallowed hard. "That's not true." "No," she challenged, one brow arched. "I came by in March. I rang the bell. Waited 15 minutes. Jasper told me you weren't home." Her arms slowly unfolded. "We were home," she said, voice flat. "Every day that week." The words landed in my stomach like a rock. "He told me," he said. "I know what he said." She took a step forward now, closer, her slippers soft against the wood porch. "But let me show you something." She turned and walked inside. The scent hit me instantly as I followed her in. Lemon polish on old wood, cinnamon tucked into the corners of the kitchen, the same as it ever was. The air held echoes of Grandpa humming while decanting wine samples, of late-night laughter by the fireplace, of the click of pen against paper when he sat with his ledger and the ever-present journal. She led me past the sitting room, down the hall, and into Grandpa's study. The room was untouched, save for a layer of dust on the desk. She picked up the black leather-bound notebook from the side table and held it out. "He kept calling you." I took it slowly. The pages were filled with scribbled notes, vine acidity levels, shipping dates, project outlines, but at the top of many, he'd written the same thing: "Call Miles. Tell him to come home." Beside it was a phone number, a 10-digit string I didn't recognize. "That's not mine," I whispered. "I know," she replied. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the number. "Who did he keep calling?" Her lips tightened. "It wasn't a random mistake. Someone gave him that number, and they knew it wasn't yours." I felt the heat rise behind my eyes, not from shame, but fury. "They wanted him to think I didn't care." "He thought you had chosen to stay away," she said quietly. "And he never stopped waiting. Not until his last day." I sank into the armchair near the fireplace. Everything inside me felt like it had splintered and was now rearranging itself. "You were the only one who ever helped him run this place," she added. "Jasper? He wanted the brand, not the soil. And your father only ever showed up for the photos." I opened the back pages of the notebook, and there it was, a sketch. A layout of the greenhouse we'd worked on together the summer I turned 25. A few vines circled in red ink. Underneath it, Grandpa had written, "Let him finish what we started." I looked up at Grandma. "Why didn't you call me directly?" Her face cracked, just for a second. "I trusted them. I thought if they said you were too busy, it must be true. You've always been the quiet one, Miles. I figured, maybe life swept you somewhere else." "I was never too busy for him," I said, voice tight. "They took that from us." The silence that followed was worse than anger. It was the space where all the moments we could have had, phone calls, visits, shared meals, had lived and died. Grandma turned toward the window that overlooked the vineyard. "He left it all to you, didn't he?" I nodded. She said nothing for a long time, just stared at the rows of vines stretching toward the tree line. "He said you were the one who'd understand the land, who wouldn't sell it for a fast profit, who'd protect what mattered." I stood, notebook still in my hands. "I didn't know. I swear." "I believe you," she said, finally turning to face me again. Her eyes were glassy now, but proud. "But believing isn't the same as forgiving. That has to be earned. You want this place? Then stay. Let it remember you. Let me see you walk the fields like you used to." "I will," I said. And I meant it. I wasn't going to run this time. Not from the family that tried to erase me, not from the land that still remembered my name. I would rebuild what they buried. Grandma didn't weep. She didn't tremble or fall into my arms with the theatrics my mother had perfected. No, Evie Harrington moved like stone and spoke like steel. After she showed me the notebook, after we stood in that silence that knew no words, she turned, walked straight to the rotary phone in the kitchen, and spun the numbers one by one with a deliberate calm that told me something bigger was about to break open. I watched from the doorway, heart still catching its breath. My hands were raw from gripping the edges of the notebook, like holding truth could somehow make it hurt less. She lifted the receiver to her ear. "Marjorie," she said, crisp as brittle parchment. "Wyatt, Jasper, and Alina. Be at the estate in 1 hour. No excuses." She didn't wait for objections. Didn't entertain responses. Just hung up the phone with the kind of finality I imagine God used after he kicked Adam and Eve out of Eden. Then she dialed again. "Mr. Lennox," she said to the lawyer, "there's something Miles needs to hear. Something his grandfather left, but wanted read in front of everyone. Bring it. And don't be late." She hung up, and for a moment, the kitchen returned to its familiar hum, the quiet tick of the wall clock, the low creak of the floorboards beneath our feet. Outside the window, the vines swayed in the wind, whispering like they were listening in. Grandma turned to face me. "Sit," she said. "He wanted you to hear this. But not alone." I moved to the old wooden chair by the table, the same one Grandpa used to occupy during harvest meetings. The seat still had a dent where his weight had lived for years. I ran my hand across the wood grain like it could answer the questions burning in my chest. "You were always the one he trusted," she said, pouring hot water into a chipped mug, dropping in a tea bag. "Not because you were loud or flashy, but because you listened. You paid attention to what mattered. The soil, the vines, the people. And they hated me for it," I murmured. "No," she corrected. "They feared you for it. Wyatt, Marjorie, Jasper, even Alina. You were a threat they never admitted out loud." I looked up. "Why bring them here now?" She set the mug in front of me. "Because truth has teeth, Miles. And it's time they feel the bite." I didn't say anything else. There was nothing to add. Just the tight grip of dread and expectation twisting inside me. The kitchen felt like a stage before a reckoning. Each tile underfoot humming with the ghosts of the past. An hour passed. Then another 30 minutes. And then, the gates creaked open. From the front porch, I watched the black SUV crawl up the drive, followed by a sleek silver coupe. Jasper stepped out first, his jaw locked, eyes already scanning like he was preparing for war. Alina followed, sunglasses perched like armor across her face, her walk as poised as ever, until she saw me standing there. She faltered. Just slightly. Just enough. My parents emerged behind them. My father, straight-backed and unsmiling, looked at me like I was a stain on a freshly pressed shirt. My mother clutched her purse like it might shield her from the day. I stayed silent as they walked up the steps. "What is this?" Alina asked, sliding off her sunglasses with a slow flick of her fingers. "Miles, are you seriously squatting here now?" Grandma opened the door fully before I could answer. "Inside. All of you." They followed her, some with more protest in their eyes than others. My mother muttered something about being ambushed. My father just walked like a man used to being obeyed. Jasper looked amused, as if all of this was a poorly written play. Alina kept glancing at me like I was a ghost she hadn't expected to confront so soon. We sat around the same long table Grandpa once used to sign contracts and sketch out visions of future harvests. The notebook was in front of me. The map, tucked into my pocket. My hands were steady now. Then Mr. Lennox entered, briefcase in hand. His face betrayed nothing, but the weight he carried was obvious. "There's another letter," he said. "One Mr. Harrington instructed me to withhold until everyone was present." He pulled out the envelope. This one was sealed in red wax, stamped with the vineyard's emblem, 3 clustered grapes. He handed it to me. "Would you like to read it?" he asked. I looked around the room. At the people who had cast me aside, rewritten my role in their lives as irrelevant, and then back to the letter. "No," I said. "You read it." Lennox nodded, broke the seal, and unfolded the thick parchment with reverence. Then he began. "To my grandson Miles," he read. "If you're hearing this, then my faith was well placed. You found your way home, not just to the land, but to the truth buried in it." My mother shifted in her seat. "Those in this room may not understand why I've done what I've done," Lennox continued. "But it was necessary. Because legacy should go to the one who values it, not the one who expects it. Alina's fingers twitched. Jasper has charm. Wyatt has pride. Marjorie has ambition. And Alina has calculation. But you, Miles, you had patience, loyalty, integrity. You helped me tend to the vines in the dead heat of July, not for a paycheck, but because you cared. You stayed late. You asked the right questions. You showed up when everyone else found excuses. Lennox looked up, voice clear. To the one they called useless, I give everything. Then he closed the letter. The room was quiet, but not for long. The silence after Lennox finished reading was a thing with teeth. Not a pause, not a breath. A silence that grew claws and wrapped itself around the room like a vice, squeezing the air from every corner. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The shock had its own choreography, and I watched them all stumble through it. Grandma Evie was still, calm, in a way only people who'd already accepted the truth could be. She sat at the head of the table, hands folded, eyes unflinching. I could feel her beside me like a silent shield, her presence stronger than any words. Alina was the first to react. Her mouth opened slightly, not to speak, but to exhale, like something had just punched her in the gut. The color drained from her cheeks, the smirk she wore like a second skin finally cracking. Her eyes darted to Jasper, who was still frozen, blinking slowly as if the words hadn't quite reached him yet. He was always slower when reality didn't favor him. Then my mother's voice broke the tension. He wasn't supposed to be here, she whispered. There it was. The truth, unwrapped and accidental. Wyatt turned to her, sharp and low. Marjorie. But she ignored him. Her eyes locked on me, and for the first time in years, I saw something beyond the mask, fear. Not of me, but of what I now represented. The son they underestimated, the man they discarded, the name they tried to cut out of the will with careful scissors and cold dinners. Lennox slid the final page of the letter back into the envelope and said nothing. His role was complete, but his eyes flicked to me for a half-second, just long enough to ask without asking, "Are you ready for what comes next?" I was. I stood. Alina blinked rapidly, like she was shaking off a dream. "This has to be a mistake," she said. "Miles doesn't know anything about managing an estate. He's not equipped." Her voice cracked on that last word. I caught it. So did everyone else. "You mean I'm not Jasper?" I said, keeping my tone even. "Or my father? Or the man you thought I'd have to become to matter?" She looked like she wanted to spit something venomous, but the moment had already slipped from her control. Jasper finally spoke. "This is insane," he said, standing so quickly his chair scraped hard against the wood floor. "You can't seriously believe any of this. He didn't run the business. He wasn't involved in negotiations. He didn't even show up for the last harvest. I came in March," I said. "You told me Grandma wasn't home." He paused, jaw clenched. "She wasn't." "She was," I replied. "Every day that week." Jasper looked to our parents for backup, but they stayed quiet. My father stared at the floor. My mother pinched the bridge of her nose like she could press the situation back into place. "I earned this," Jasper said, pointing a finger at the table like it owed him something. "I gave up everything to make sure this family name meant something. Miles didn't sacrifice anything." "You mean the way you sacrificed my marriage?" I asked, turning slowly toward Alina. Her body stiffened. "That's not fair," she said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "You called me useless," I said. "At the will reading. You stood there, hand in hand with my brother, and said it like it was gospel. But you knew. You knew what Grandpa was planning." "I thought he was bluffing," she whispered. "We all did." "We thought." "We," I repeated. "So it wasn't just you and Jasper. It was the three of you." She said nothing. Jasper stepped forward, trying to regain control. "You don't have what it takes to run this place. You're sentimental. You want to preserve things that need to be torn down. I have what matters," I said, slowly, firmly. "The name, the land, the legacy, and the truth." Lennox cleared his throat, sensing the emotional tremors building to a dangerous peak. "The estate has been legally transferred. The patents, the land, the lab, all of it is now under Miles's name, as per the amended trust signed and notarized 10 days before Mr. Harrington's passing." Alina looked like she might collapse. Jasper looked like he wanted to burn the place down. My mother finally stood. "We're leaving." Grandma Evie leaned forward, her voice quiet but surgical. "This is still my house. And for the record, you're no longer welcome here." Marjorie opened her mouth, but Wyatt gently touched her elbow. Let's go. The four of them stood, each one refusing to look directly at me. As they walked past, I could feel their energy fraying, unraveling under the weight of a truth they couldn't reverse. Their plan had failed. The safety net was gone. The empire they tried to build on exclusion and control had collapsed, not with a bang, but with a letter and a long overdue reckoning. I didn't follow them to the door. I stayed at the table, one hand resting on the grain, the other over Grandpa's notebook. When the door finally clicked shut behind them, I felt it, something lift, like a chain snapped, like the air had space again. Grandma turned to me. He knew they'd try to bury you. I nodded, but he left me the shovel. Jasper stood so fast his chair crashed against the floor behind him. You said I'd get it all. You promised. His voice cracked like thunder against the kitchen walls, sharp and loud enough to make the glass in the cabinet tremble. He wasn't yelling at me. Not at Lennox. Not even at Grandma. He was yelling at my father, Wyatt. The man who had promised him a crown that never belonged to him in the first place. My father didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. He just sat there, lips pressed into a hard line, eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the table. Maybe he was calculating. Maybe he was ashamed. Or maybe, more likely, he was just thinking about how fast he could pivot this humiliation into a new story where he still looked like a patriarch. My mother looked away entirely, her hand clutching her purse in a death grip. The tightness in her jaw said everything. This was not how it was supposed to go. The Harrington name was supposed to stay polished and untarnished. Miles, the quiet one, the afterthought, was supposed to fade, conveniently forgotten once the estate changed hands and Jasper was installed as the public heir. Alina's voice sliced through the noise. You were supposed to divorce him after the reading. What is this? My head turned toward her, slowly. That's when the hollow feeling in my chest wasn't just disbelief, it was grief. The kind of grief that feels like something breaking in your ribs and spreading like fire under your skin. You what? I asked her. Not shouted. Not accused. Just asked. Because I needed to hear her say it with her own mouth. She folded her arms, but her expression buckled. We had a plan. Your father, Jasper. I didn't think he'd leave it to you. We thought it would go to the company, and Jasper would handle it. I would separate from you after the reading. Clean break. And I was the pawn. I asked. Just someone to keep warm until it was official? She didn't deny it. Jasper stepped forward, agitated now. She's with me now, Miles. Everyone knows it. Even your parents. I turned to them. My father didn't respond. My mother looked like she'd rather melt into the floor than confront me directly. That was the moment I realized. None of this had happened behind their backs. They'd all known. They'd helped build the lie. Lennox raised a hand from across the table. There's more, he said calmly, as if none of this betrayal warranted pause. He reached into his briefcase and produced another envelope, smaller, handwritten, and sealed with a single initial, H. He unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. I knew they would twist things. The letter began. My grandfather's voice carried through Lennox's cadence. Jasper was always the fire, but fire without discipline consumes everything in its path. And Alina. Alina knew how to wear sincerity like a dress, change it for the next room she entered. Across the table, Alina's jaw clenched. But Miles, Lennox continued, glancing at me briefly. He took responsibility. When no one watched. When no one cared. He never stopped showing up. He never needed an audience. He never asked for praise. There was a rustle of clothing as Jasper shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face reddening. I watched from the window the night Miles carried those broken fermentation casks to the back shed during the thunderstorm. Alone. Soaked. Not because anyone told him to, but because he didn't want the interns to be out in that storm. That's when I knew. Lennox paused. Let the silence swell. Then read the final lines. I leave this legacy to the one who never needed to prove anything because he already earned it. Alina's hand flew to her mouth. Not from shock. From shame. Or fear. Or the realization that she had bet on the wrong brother and the wrong future. Jasper pushed back from the table again, pacing now, his fury boiling over. He manipulated you, he snapped, jabbing a finger toward the letter. You were old, and he played on your emotions. You think Miles didn't know what he was doing? Always playing the humble card, always just showing up? He didn't earn it. He tricked you. He's dead, Jasper, Grandma said sharply, standing now. Are you really going to accuse a man in his grave of manipulation? Or are you just angry the game didn't go your way? He stopped, chest heaving, fists tight. I stood too, finally, stepping between them, not in confrontation, but in finality. I never asked for this war, I said. I never wanted to be your enemy. But I won't apologize for being chosen by the man who taught me everything I know. Alina's voice was smaller now. You were supposed to stay invisible. You mean I was supposed to stay silent? I corrected her. She didn't speak again. Grandma stepped forward, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. Let them go, she said. Let them walk away with whatever pride they have left. This house doesn't need their noise anymore. One by one, they gathered their coats and their pride. Wyatt was the first out the door, his movements sharp and efficient. Marjorie followed, still refusing to look at me. Alina lingered the longest, casting one final glance at the place that could have been hers, if she'd only chosen loyalty over leverage. And Jasper, my brother, walked out last. No words, no apology, just silence, brittle and bitter. And then the door shut behind them. I stood there for a long time, not saying anything, not thinking about revenge or triumph, just breathing. Because for the first time in a long time, the house was quiet, and I finally knew who I was. Alina didn't move. The others had stormed out hours ago, Wyatt with tight fists, Marjorie clutching her handbag like a judge's gavel, Jasper radiating betrayal through his silence. But she stayed, sat at the table as if refusing to accept that the game had ended and she'd lost. Her fingers were curled around the stem of a wine glass she hadn't sipped from, the lipstick on the rim still unbroken. She was too proud for tears, too calculating for outbursts. So she stayed seated, as if stillness could undo the verdict. I leaned against the archway, arms folded, watching her like I was trying to study a stranger. And in a way, I was. You called me useless, I said quietly, not needing to raise my voice. At the will reading. In front of my family. My brother. You said it like you meant it. Her eyes didn't lift. I did. Honesty. It hit harder than denial. But I welcomed it. Lies were exhausting. We'd lived in a web of them for years. And now? I asked. She lifted her gaze, finally meeting mine. Her voice was hollow, flat like the edge of a blade dulled by overuse. I thought your grandfather was bluffing. We all did. We thought he was using the vineyard as a placeholder. That he'd sign it over to Jasper through the foundation. That he'd eventually fold. We, I echoed. Not just you. No, she said. Not just me. Your father, your brother, me. We planned this differently. I stared at her, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Somewhere deep down, I'd known. The late-night calls that ended when I entered the room. The dismissive remarks about Grandpa's sentimentalism. The trips Jasper made under the guise of estate management, while I was asked to sit them out. It had all been coordinated. A quiet coup against a man they saw as irrelevant and another man they considered expendable. So you married me with an expiration date, I said. No, she replied quickly, her voice rising slightly. I didn't plan it that way. Not in the beginning. Then when? She hesitated. After the first time Jasper brought it up, he said, you weren't a threat. That if we worked together, we could shape things. Keep the family's legacy in the right hands. I laughed, bitter and low. So I was the Trojan horse. She flinched at that. Not visibly, but I saw it in the way her shoulders twitched, how she gripped the glass tighter. It got complicated. No, I said. It got exposed. She stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. You don't understand the pressure I was under, don't, I interrupted. Don't you dare give me a speech about pressure. I worked 2 jobs the first year we were married while you finished grad school. I took care of your mother when she was recovering from surgery. I handled your father's taxes because no one else would, and I never once asked for credit. And the whole time, you were building an escape plan with the man who shares my blood. Alina turned her face away. We didn't think you'd matter. And there it was. The core truth. The sentence that defined the last decade of my life. I didn't matter, I said. Until I did. The silence stretched. She turned to me then, slowly. You don't have the skills to run this estate, Miles. You think this place runs on good intentions? Sentiment? It's a business. It will eat you alive. You may be right, I said. But I have the name. And now I have the truth. That's more than you ever gave me. She took a step closer, something desperate clawing its way behind her words. You don't know what you're doing. This land, the vineyards, the research, there are people out there waiting to carve it apart the moment you slip. Jasper and your father had the infrastructure. The investors. You have what? Integrity. I have the documents, I said. The patents, the trademarks, the land rights, the funding Grandpa set aside through the Sustainable Grant Initiative. Her eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't known about that part. You didn't read the full letter, did you? I asked. She said nothing. He put me in contact with someone, a professor from Atlanta, Dr. Harper Nduka, soil science, renewable agriculture. Grandpa planned it all, and he left me every tool I need. Her lip curled slightly. You think that makes you powerful? No, I said. I think it makes me responsible. Alina stared at me like she was trying to see the man she once married. Maybe she was, but I was no longer him. She adjusted her coat, lifted her purse, and gave the kitchen one last scan, as if memorizing it, as if part of her still believed she'd return. But then Grandma stepped into the doorway behind me. This is still my house, she said coldly, and you're no longer welcome here. Alina's jaw twitched, but she nodded. Understood. She walked past me, brushing against my shoulder like a ghost still seeking warmth. I didn't turn to watch her leave. The door opened, closed, and then the house exhaled. I stood there, letting it sink in. The marriage, the betrayal, the fact that I'd spent so long proving myself to someone who never had the capacity to see my worth. Grandma said nothing. She just moved to the table and began collecting the cups, as if we'd finished nothing more than a simple tea. You okay? She asked finally. No, I said, but I will be, because the people who left had done their worst, and I was still standing. The morning after they left, the air on the estate felt different, lighter somehow, as if the walls had released a breath they'd been holding for years. No voices echoing false pleasantries, no calculating eyes measuring the worth of everything they touched. Just the quiet groan of floorboards, the rustle of trees beyond the vineyard, and the steady rhythm of my boots against the earth as I stepped outside. The sun had barely risen above the hills when I reached the edge of the vineyard. The rows were still as soldiers, vines arched toward the sky like they remembered who they were waiting for. My breath fogged slightly in the crisp morning air. Autumn in Ashwood was like no place else, golden light over soil rich with legacy and promise. I'd walked these rows as a boy beside Grandpa, my hand dwarfed in his, listening to him talk about balance, about how grapes didn't just grow, they responded. The vine remembers, he used to say. You treat it with care, it rewards you. You neglect it, it tells everyone who you are. I ran my fingers across the base of a Cabernet vine, its bark rough, steady. I wondered how many storms it had survived. I wondered if it had missed me. Maybe I was foolish to think so, but something about that land always felt personal. Back at the house, Grandma was already in the kitchen, tea steaming beside her, a thick manila folder open on the table. He left you this too, she said without looking up. It was in the cellar safe. I took the folder and flipped it open. Inside were permits, architectural plans, research summaries, and tucked in between them, his journals. Dozens of them. Grandpa's writing was everywhere. Notes on irrigation, sustainable growth models, compost breakdown timelines. But more than that, stories. Observations. He wrote about me. I found my name again and again in the margins. Miles suggested planting cover crops between the rows. Said it would hold moisture better. Smart thinking. Quiet, but sharp. If I'm gone before I get to teach him everything, I hope these notes help. He'll know what to do. He always did. My throat tightened as I turned the pages. I'd been written into the blueprint of this place. Not by title, not by inheritance, but by action, by presence. And they hadn't seen it. I spent that day walking every corner of the estate. The greenhouse Grandpa had built with his own hands was still intact, though the lock had rusted. Inside, the scent of soil and dormant life lingered, mixed with dried lavender and the faintest trace of cedar. He'd been working on something big. Rows of custom soil plots, test panels, even nutrient scans. It was more than a vineyard. It was a lab, a legacy he hadn't broadcast because he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. That evening, I called Dr. Harper Nduka. He remembered me instantly. Miles, he said, voice warm and worn. Elliot said you might reach out. Elliot Harrington, my grandfather, had quietly funded a few of Dr. Nduka's soil regeneration projects over the years. Turns out, they were planning something together. A collaboration focused on rebuilding worn agricultural lands using organic filtration and nutrient-rich grape varietals. A program they'd named VINE, Vineyard Innovation and Nutrient Engineering. He wanted to launch it here, Dr. Induka said this land held something special, not just scientifically, but spiritually. It's rooted in care. That night, I lay awake reading through Grandpa's plans. He hadn't just left me land. He'd left me purpose. Within the month, I reopened the lab. We cleared out debris, installed new panels, and connected it to the main estate grid. I hired back 2 of the old seasonal workers, Luis and Nia, both of whom hugged me like I was a prodigal son. "You came back," Nia said, her eyes glassy. "We didn't think you would." I nodded, wiping my palms on my jeans. I didn't know I was supposed to. Not until now. And then we got to work. We tested the soil pH across every quadrant of the vineyard. We recharted irrigation pathways, repaired pressure valves, and mapped out sections for experimental crops. Dr. Induka visited twice that month, staying in the guest cottage Grandpa used to loan out to visiting scholars. Together, we began reimagining the estate, not just as a vineyard, but as a model for regenerative agriculture. We hosted local university students for seminars, partnered with neighboring farms to pilot nutrient share programs. Within 6 months, the whispers began. Industry blogs started writing about the Harrington shift, about how the quiet son had returned with vision. No one mentioned Jasper, or Wyatt, or Alina. They'd faded like noise behind a closed door. We even began developing a grape strain that could grow in drought-prone soil, one Grandpa had been testing in secret. I named it Evie Blue, after the woman who refused to let them sell this house out from under him. The first harvest was small, but promising. One morning, I stood at the edge of the eastern plot, watching the sunrise cast amber across the rows. I had dirt under my fingernails, calluses forming again. My body ached from real work, honest work, but I never felt more alive. This land, this inheritance, they couldn't steal it because they never understood what it really was. It wasn't just money, or land deeds, or assets to manage. It was soil memory, quiet strength, a story passed hand to hand. And I was the only one who listened long enough to hear it. It had been almost 2 years since I'd last seen Jasper in person. In that time, the estate had grown from reclaimed land and silent vines into something vibrant, something loud in the right ways. The lab was in full operation. The vineyard produced 2 sustainable blends that had already caught the attention of buyers across the country. Vine had expanded into 4 nearby counties, teaching farmers to repair instead of replace. But more than that, peace had finally taken root in me. So when the envelope arrived, thin and unassuming, I almost threw it away. My name was written on the front in Jasper's slanted, impatient script. No return address. Just a single line inside the card. "I'd like to visit. Just to talk. Jay." I read it 3 times. Folded it. Unfolded it again. Then I slipped it in my desk drawer and tried to forget it. But the thing about old wounds is they don't need much to bleed again. For 3 days, I didn't reply. I buried myself in field reports, nutrient assessments, and meetings with the State Agriculture Board. But late one night, while reviewing a grant proposal by lamplight, I found myself staring at the drawer again. That envelope, still folded neat and quiet, might as well have been glowing. The next morning, I called the number he'd scrawled on the back. "You can come," I said, before he could even say hello. "One day. That's it." There was a pause. Not even a breath. Then, "Thank you." The line went dead. He arrived 3 days later, driving a gray sedan I didn't recognize, wearing clothes that didn't fit the man I remembered. No tailored suit. No designer watch. Just a button-down shirt and slacks that had seen better seasons. His face was thinner, not sickly, but lean in a way that spoke of quiet wear. His hair was overgrown. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced with something I didn't know what to call yet. Fatigue, maybe, or surrender. I met him at the gate and didn't offer a handshake. "You can park by the tool shed," I said. "Don't block the trucks." He nodded without argument. We walked in silence down the path toward the vineyard. The air was filled with the hum of bees near the late blossoms and the crisp scent of turning leaves. We passed 2 interns from the lab, both of whom glanced at me with curious eyes as they nodded hello. I didn't explain, didn't introduce him. We reached the east field, the plot Grandpa always favored. Jasper stopped and looked over it. "It's different," he said. "The land. It feels alive." "It always was," I replied. "You just never noticed." He gave a soft grunt. "That's fair." I didn't respond. I didn't know if I wanted fairness from him. I didn't know what I wanted, really. We sat on the old bench beneath the oak tree that overlooked the property, the one Grandpa and I used to share after long days of tending vines. The wood had aged but remained sturdy. Like him. I lost everything, Jasper said without prompting. The investors pulled out after the merger collapsed. The house in Sonoma gone. The account Alina and I shared? Drained. She's married to someone else now. I said nothing. He continued. I made a lot of bad calls, Miles. I was so sure I'd win that I never imagined what losing would look like. But now I do. I've seen it. Lived it. Still, I kept quiet. He looked at me finally. I'm not here to ask for money. Or for forgiveness. I'm not entitled to either. I studied him. He wasn't performing. Not this time. What are you here for? I asked. He looked out across the vineyard. Work, he said. A job. Something to do with my hands. Something real. I felt the weight of that request pressed down into the hollow places in my chest. The part of me that still remembered being told I was second best. The kid who got left off the family Christmas card list. The man who watched his own brother steal his wife and call it inevitability. But I also remembered Grandpa. The way he used to say, everyone deserves one honest chance to start over. Just one. I stood and motioned for him to follow. We walked toward the compost lot behind the greenhouse, where the soil is turned by hand and the scent is thick with decay and growth. A place that's humble by design. Foundational. Hard. This is the compost crew, I said, gesturing to the bins and piles and steam rising in the cool morning air. Start here. 4 hours a day. 5 days a week. If you miss a shift, you're done. If you lie, you're done. You want to be here? You earn it. Jasper nodded. Thank you. I handed him a shovel. And just like that, my brother, the same man who once called me a placeholder, took a step into the dirt and began to work. The following weeks passed quietly. He showed up on time, kept his head down. He didn't try to charm the interns or name-drop past board positions. He didn't flinch at the labor. One afternoon, I found him washing his own lunch tin in the outdoor sink near the vineyard shed, humming softly to himself. That's when I realized something had changed. Not in him, but in me. I no longer carried the weight of needing anything from him. No apology. No approval. I was free. One morning, Grandma Evie joined me on the porch as I sipped coffee. She watched Jasper across the field, his sleeves rolled up, dirt on his forearms, sweat darkening his collar. He asked about you, she said. What did he say? He said he didn't know how you got so strong. I gave a half smile. Because no one was holding me up. She nodded. Maybe now, he's ready to learn. I watched him lift a wheelbarrow full of compost and push it without complaint. The same brother who once tried to erase me with a smirk and a signature now worked in silence, rebuilding a man beneath layers of dirt. Maybe this was his penance. Maybe it wasn't. But I gave him the same thing Grandpa gave me. A chance. Not because I was trying to save him, but because this land, this life, was built on quiet redemption, and I intended to honor every root of it. 6 years. That's how long it had been since I sat in the back of a courtroom-like conference room and heard my wife call me useless. Since my father looked me in the face and told me to go earn my own. Since my brother, Jasper, slid his arm around the woman I'd built a life with and smirked like my failure had always been inevitable. And yet here I was. Not buried. Not bitter. Alive and thriving. The vineyard no longer looked like a place struggling to remember itself. It had bloomed. Not just in fruit and foliage, but in purpose. Every inch of the land bore the signs of renewal. The greenhouse now operated year-round, housing experiments that pushed the boundaries of regenerative agriculture. Dr. Harper and Duca had become a regular presence, sometimes bringing students from universities across the country to study the estate's methods. The Vine program, what Grandpa and I had once dreamed of in scribbled notes and quiet conversations, was now recognized on a national level. We'd partnered with farms in Texas, Michigan, even overseas in parts of Spain and Kenya. Our drought-resistant varietals, particularly the Evie Blue, were being hailed as a breakthrough for sustainable wine production in climate-challenged regions. I gave keynote addresses at conferences I once couldn't afford to attend. I sat on panels with scientists and agronomists whose names used to grace the covers of books I studied in silence. But I never wore a suit, never brought fanfare. I let the work speak, because that was what Grandpa taught me. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you plant when no one's watching. And that plaque, those words, were carved in polished stone just outside the lab, beneath a grapevine I'd grafted myself. Below the quote was one name, etched simply, Miles. I walked past it every morning, not for affirmation, but to remind myself of what had grown from the ashes of my dismissal. My parents now lived in Florida, retired early. I hadn't spoken to them in almost 4 years. They never reached out. Maybe they didn't know what to say. Maybe they didn't care to. Either way, their silence had become its own kind of peace. Alina remarried within 9 months of the will reading. A tech entrepreneur from Connecticut, according to what little I chose to learn. It didn't last. Divorced within the year. I wasn't surprised. A life built on opportunism rarely holds. She sent me an email once. A vague apology buried inside a paragraph about wishing things had gone differently. I didn't reply. She wasn't reaching out for forgiveness. She was reaching out to see if I still hurt. I didn't. Not anymore. Jasper still worked on the estate. After his time on the compost crew, he transitioned to the greenhouse, then the distribution wing. I let him grow into his role slowly, without reward, without spotlight. He never asked for a title. He didn't want one. He came early, left late, took lunch with the crew. Sometimes, I'd find him standing at the edge of the south field just watching, quiet, as if searching for something lost. One evening, I joined him. "You ever think about what it would have been like," he asked, "if we'd grown up with more truth?" "Every day," I replied. He nodded slowly. I didn't know how much of what they taught me was poison until I tasted it for myself. He looked thinner these days, but healthier, like someone shedding a skin he never wanted. "I can't undo it," he said. "Any of it." "You're not supposed to," I said. "You're supposed to carry it better now." He looked at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes since we were kids. Respect. We didn't hug, didn't shake hands. We just stood side by side, watching the sun dip behind the hills. There was still pain between us. That wouldn't vanish. But it didn't rule the space anymore. It just lived there quietly, like old roots deep in the ground that no longer strangle the harvest above. The vineyard had become more than an operation. It had become a refuge. We hosted local workshops for young farmers who'd been priced out of land or discouraged by outdated systems. We opened our doors to veterans of the industry who wanted to start fresh without selling their souls to corporations. People came from across the country, sometimes from across oceans, just to walk the fields, ask questions, and feel hope again. Reporters asked for interviews, documentaries. I turned most of them down. The work was the story, not me. One afternoon, I received a letter from a university back east. They wanted to offer me an honorary doctorate for my contributions to sustainable farming and rural economic development. I accepted, but insisted the ceremony be held here, on the estate, beneath the oak tree. No stage, no podium, just people, just soil under our feet. The day of the event, I stood at the center of the vineyard, same place where Jasper once told me I didn't have what it took. The vines around us were full, the trellises clean and proud. The air buzzed with quiet joy. Former interns, now running their own projects, had flown in. Dr. Nduka stood beside me, smiling like a father figure. Grandma Evie washed from her favorite chair on the porch, cane resting across her lap, as sharp as ever. When they called my name and placed the medallion around my neck, I didn't think about revenge, or proving anyone wrong. I thought about Grandpa's calloused hands, his laughter in the cellar, his belief in things that grow slowly but deeply. I looked out at the crowd and said simply, "Thank you." Not for the honor, but for showing up to witness what patience looks like. This land was never about wealth. It was about restoration. For the earth. For the people who live on it. And sometimes, for the people who nearly lose everything before they understand what they had. Applause rang out. But I didn't let it linger. We returned to work within the hour. The vines weren't interested in applause. They wanted water, attention, balance. Just like everything good in life. That night, I walked the vineyard alone. The stars shimmered overhead, and the earth beneath my boots felt solid, warm. I reached the east field and stood beside the plaque again. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you plant when no one's watching. I ran my fingers across the word beneath it, Miles, and exhaled. Not in relief. In reverence. Because they had tried to bury me with shame, with silence, with betrayal. But I'd grown, not in spite of them, but far, far beyond them. And no one would ever mistake me for the useless man in the room again.